Good evening to all of you. You're watching Lok Sabha TV. I'm Anurag Punetha with you. On the call of his conscience at the last minute, Prime Minister Modi pulled out of RCEP, which is a regional comprehensive economic partnership, the biggest free trade agreement with 40% of global commerce and half the population of the world. We are going to discuss, was it really a bold move on the part of Prime Minister Modi to pull out at the 11th hour, or would it be economic imprudence of India to remain out of that pact in this edition of Public Forum? And joining me for the discussion from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Dr. Sheetal Sharma. She's international relations expert. Very warm welcome to the show, Dr. Sheetal. My second guest is Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, international relations expert as well. Very warm welcome to the show, Dr. Chaulia. India has a couple of months to ponder about it. I mean, Dr. Chaulia, your assessment about this decision. Because India initially was kind of struggling with China to at least open its market, because the trade deficit with China is a huge. So if India is opting out at the last moment, how do you see Prime Minister Modi's move?
Yeah, you know, the Chinese, the fear of Chinese surge of exports is what I think is the primary driver of this decision, right? Because the bilateral trade deficit is already 50 billion. Out of out of a total volume of 95. It's over 50 billion is the deficit in favor of China. That could you know, make it even more imbalanced, which gives us also a strategic disadvantage vis-a-vis China, you know.
That's right.
So we've been trying to correct it. And RCEP, you know, if the rules of origin from where the components are manufactured, if they're not properly tracked, there's always a danger that Chinese products will come disguised as exports of third countries. For example, they are manufacturing something in Cambodia, and Cambodia is exporting to India as part of RCEP, then it will not be counted as Chinese, but actually de facto it's a Chinese, like a Trojan horse. So that is the real danger, you know, the threat. And the Chinese are in a hurry, and we know that. You see, I think Prime Minister read the situation correctly, because the Chinese are desperate for new markets as a result of the Trump's trade barriers. So they have fast forwarded, and they are pushing very hard for RCEP to be concluded as quickly as possible. I'm not saying it should be indefinitely delayed, but see, the concerns of a major market of 1.2 billion should have been taken into consideration. From what I'm hearing from government sources, the Chinese did not budge on many of the demands we were making, and they did not allow concessions to be made. So clearly they thought that they could somehow get their way. And I think we have clearly put the nation first, and India's domestic, especially domestic industry and agriculture, farming, all these sectors will be hurt. But the question really is, on the other side, Anurag, is okay, we took a stand, a principled stand based on our national interests, the way we calculate our national interests. But the other, from a foreign policy point of view, is nonetheless they go ahead and do it. If the remaining 15 create this new architecture, we are out of the architecture, and under this new regime they will formulate new standards, new procedures, new regulatory you know, bodies for tariffs, non-tariff barriers, the whole thing. And if we are left out of it, integration, the regional integration, Prime Minister was very clear, we want regional integration, but not at the cost of domestic industry. So it's a difficult balancing act. In other words, a China-led Indo-Pacific is not what we want.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, if we are out of RCEP completely, or if we never join it, then the Chinese will steal the show and run it. So the same with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the other trade deal that Trump pulled out, with citing similar reasons, domestic interests, unions, trade union workers, they didn't want. And then if the US is out of it, the Chinese are going to shape the TPP also, or the Asian trade regime, although China is not part of TPP. So the real question is, from a strategic point of view, it's good to say no and object when it comes to core national interests, but what is the alternative, and how can we fill the void that the Chinese might be ready to take over, you know? And that's the big, I think, foreign policy challenge going forward, even as we try to work out the RCEP nitty-gritty.
Was it merely a, what you call, the perceived Chinese threat, the Chinese good would somehow flood the Indian market, or there was some other contours in that, so India said no?
I think, Anurag, there is a structural weakness we have in our domestic economy. We don't have enough manufacturing and export-oriented production. That's a fact. That's why we are mostly defensive on these things. Even WTO, many ministerials in the past also, we have, you know, blocked final agreement, because we just don't have the kind of heavy industrialization. So most of our exports, even if you see the components, the mix of components, most of them are primary products. You know, we don't do advanced manufactured goods. So the terms of trade are not favorable. You know, they are usually favor manufactured goods. So in this case also, I think it's China plus also even India ASEAN FTA has been there for nearly a decade now, and we are running a deficit with them also. Some of these smaller ASEAN countries are not gigantic like China, but you know, they are heavily, relatively speaking, much more industrialized than India is. So the basic issue is this incompatibility. You know, structurally we are not ready for global competition. So some of the chambers, for example, had been arguing that it is better to be in RCEP because we will miss the boat and we will miss the big picture of shaping the trading architecture of the region and all. But those are export lobbies speaking, you see. But the export lobby is not strong enough and not powerful enough to generate. Most of our GDP comes from consumption and domestic consumption. So our route for growth, it seems, even though Prime Minister set ambitious target for, you know, doubling or tripling the exports, it still is primarily centered on domestic consumption. So the model should be attracting more FDI, and PM made a big strong pitch for it in Thailand during the East Asia Summit and the ASEAN Summit, saying, you know, our ease of doing a business ranking has improved 79 places. This is the best time to come to India. So even if we are not part of these trade deals, our route for growth is probably going to be different from these more industrialized countries. It's going to be FDI based, and then manufacture for domestic consumption, which is a huge 1.2 billion market. It seems that is the only thing I can see, at least in the medium term, until we, you know, make in India will take time. You know, we have not become heavily competitive in exports. That's the basic reason, Anurag, why we are holding back on these things. The countries which are more export oriented economies, led by Japan, China, South Korea, ASEAN, all of them, they want more and more market access and opening, you know. Therefore, as Sheetal was saying, our strength is in services. We want a deal. If at all there is a deal that is to break this logjam, it will be more access for our services where we have a strength. But in manufactured goods, we are weak, and that is the reason we are defensive.
Okay, do you agree? I mean, somehow we become happy the moment we get the, what you call, the importance by US, by Germany. In fact, Angela Merkel came a couple of days earlier. In fact, Germany's parliament especially passed a resolution to increase the bilateral relation with India. But if we are not in a position, in fact, I still remember there were a couple of articles and opinions at the time when the US trade war started with China. People had the opinion that probably the companies would move from the China and probably would ship to India, but that did not happen. So how to move forward now?
You know, the trade diversion from the China-US trade war has not come much towards us. Bangladesh got some, Cambodia, Vietnam got some. So I think, see, it's a work in progress. If the ease of doing business rankings are improving so dramatically, that means change is happening. Our Prime Minister is showing the way. But nonetheless, you see, for investor confidence, you see, they say that capital votes with its feet. They can go anywhere they like, you know. This is the modern mantra of globalization, right? Free movement of capital. So they have many other attractive destinations where they can invest for production. But I think the biggest thing which PM always says is demand. We have the demand and the demography and the democracy, you know, and stability, political stability. So I think we should keep on attracting that, and that's, I think, I saw in the ASEAN as well as the East Asia Summit, and also in his meetings with bilateral with important countries on the sidelines on this trip, he was you know, constantly pitching for that. And in a way that is exclusive, even if we are not part of RCEP, the attraction of India will remain, you know. The question is, how do we pack it? Like major structural roadblocks like land and labor reforms that we expect, you know, those are the things that will really speed the process and make it even more attractive. I think the China's own ranking is around 40 or so in the ease of doing business, or little less than that. So if we can reach that level from 70 odd in the next few years, I think, and just look at the size. The PM is talking about how once we were 2 trillion, now we have become 3, and we are aiming at 5 trillion. As we get bigger, I think the confidence will come more to engage in these plurilateral trade negotiations. The other point, Anurag, is apart from bilaterals, which I agree with Sheetal, is, see, our own sub-region, you know, has to be better integrated. The intra-SAARC trade is actually quite low still. And and also with poorer countries, you know, with whom we have no fear of being flooded by imports in Africa, and Latin America. The trade is growing actually. If you look at the bilateral India-Africa trade overall, the whole continent is now more than 70 billion.
Okay.
It may even reach the level of what we have with India and China, one day. So and with Latin America, it's growing fast. So we should prioritize. I think because of our structural weakness, we will be better off engaging in bilaterals and plurilaterals with countries that are structurally similar or weaker than us. You see, that's the basic norm. If you're dealing with big sharks like China or even Japan, South Korea, although we have strong strategic ties with them, economically they will always beat us until we get our house in order. So therefore, until then, maybe it's better to wall ourselves off, be protectionist, but not forever, because protectionism can also be a disease, Permanently we wall ourselves off and then we miss the boat, we are not competitive, and then we find that, the region is being shaped in a different way.
But are we giving the sense that we are protectionist in the way, because probably this may be the first move and the bold move on the part of the Prime Minister Modi, but are we giving that sense? I don't think so.
Look, no, the whole world has become protectionist. Even though these 15 countries are agreeing right now for RCEP, the fact is all of them have imposed major tariff barriers against other partners with whom they have problems. You look at the WTO statistics, the number of tariffs and non-tariff barriers globally have gone up, led by the US. And our average tariffs for a developing country, see, that's the other thing, Anurag, we always insist on this. We are still a developing country with a vast number of poor people. We should not be held to the same standard as European countries or North American countries because they have a higher standard of living. So we are entitled to some degree of protectionism. And remember, despite all the talk of free trade and its benefits, it's so liberal, that is now under cloud, you see. You look at even these countries which are industrialized today in RCEP, not any one of them followed the full idea of free trade and open market. First they protected, then they built up their national champions or industries that were became globally dominant. They did what are called industrial policy or strategic trade policy to build themselves up through protective barriers, and then opened up. You see, the question is, it should not be an indefinite process. In India, what has happened is protectionism has become a habit. People are hiding behind it. But ultimately, we would want to go out. But before going out, we should be really, beef up ourselves.
Final comment from you, Dr. Chaulia. Don't you think, when India refused this to be part of the BRI, somehow it, what do you call that, relations somehow soared between India and China, further soared. With this refusal, how do you see the relation vis-a-vis India-China?
Well, the thing is, competition is inevitable because of the size and the geographical location of China and India. We are neighbors. We are competing for, influence in the same space. So I think that cannot be denied. How do we manage it is the question. The Chinese, but you see, the Chinese are also not doing many things we want. They are not helping us on a nuclear suppliers group entry. They have not been very helpful on restraining Pakistan with terrorism. So, I think we have to hold some cards, to bargain with them. And that's the whole idea. We can't just give it away. They thought that somehow the fear of being left out will mean that we will try to be in. No matter what the costs are, but we have shown that. And the other point, last point, Anurag, is, we have, Prime Minister announced a $1 billion line of credit for improving connectivity with ASEAN countries. And that is, see, it's not only trade. Trade is one, but the blue economy, connectivity, maritime commerce that does not necessarily have to go through the RCEP route. We have existing channels. As Sheetal was saying, there's already India, ASEAN. So, and there are poorer countries in ASEAN which need our help, like what we call the CLMV countries, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Now, Vietnam probably doesn't, but the other three do. So if we look at those, there is room for expansion, and there is, with Thailand, the trade is going much faster than before, exponential growth. So those are the areas. If we target individual countries which need India much more, I think we can hold our balance against China, because otherwise the Chinese model is simply flood them and take over. What we can always say,
bilateralism can be the answer of this.
And to some kind of soft counterbalancing based on the idea that India is different from China and will not be submerging you.
Well, at the moment we can say that Indian domestic industry is reeling under pressure, and the government is grappling to deal with the domestic economic situation. A massive free trade pact like RCEP would have exposed the Indian businesses and agriculture to unequal competition from countries which are looking like a giant shark in the export arena. Probably we are talking about the China, but how long it goes, we have to wait and watch. Thank you very much, Dr. Sheetal Sharma. Thank you very much, Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, for coming and talking to us. That's all we have in this edition of Public Forum. Thank you very much for watching.